particularly in Asia, where there's been a shortage of energy to support development. They kind of put development first and ESG in a different bucket. And what we're trying to do here is have a discussion about harmonization, but what are the best practices within corporations, whether you're in financial services or manufacturing, to accelerate that process. We're lucky to have here Maher Al Kaabi, who's an independent board member of the Al Kaabi Group, has actually spent decades here working in Dubai on the operations of the government and how government works with academia and with companies on the pathway now to net zero. Martin Chilcott is Manufacture 2030, very interesting company that set up a software platform that works with some of the leading manufacturers of the world on their aspirations and goals and actual measurements on the pathway to net zero. It's great to have you both here. You know, I think it would be very interesting, Maher, to discuss about how you're working within different entities, but the Al Kaabi Group, as you were suggesting, has a phenomenal history that stretches back in Dubai, that founded as a co-founder of DEWA, the power company, which is very instrumental in the World Green Economy Summit. Gives that as an example of what you're trying to do within Al Kaabi on this pathway to net zero and some of the practices that are there.
I think the first thing that we were trying to do is understand what are the best practices globally so we can learn from them. But at the same time, as we learn from them, we will try to see what is best fitting for us in this region. So when I was asked by the Minister of Economy, Abdullah Mantouk, in the last council that we had a meeting, and he said, what you guys are doing for your framework for the net zero. So everybody was quiet because we didn't think that was a question. We thought that was just a statement. He said, okay, nobody has anything. I said, okay, we'll answer it if that was a question. So I said, well, look, we're learning. We're trying to see what are the best practices. This is what we told the team to do. And then we actually come up with a framework, what do we think is best for us? How does it meet our requirement? Because you cannot have the same processes which are working in the European sectors or US or the Far East. It has to be very important because a lot of people are jumping on the wagon saying, okay, there's no tomorrow and we need to get it done. I think no, we need to relax. We need to make sure we put the right framework, put the timeline of what you want to do. And it's very important that you engage your people. If you're going to do it just at the board level, at executive level, it's going to be very difficult for you to implement them down the line. So we started bottom-up approach. So we brought the people, we discussed with them. We tried to address two things, and I always say is, what is it we want to do, why we want to do it, and who are we going to impact with it? So once those three whys were very, very clear, it was relatively easier for people to say, okay, this is what we want to do, which is exactly what we did when we wanted to start our digital journey. If we would have said we want to digitize tomorrow, people would say, no, we don't want to digitize. But we asked them. So mind you, they came up with a framework which is much better and fitting in terms of for sustainability and net zero. So now we're saying we're going to be net zero by 2050. Hopefully we'll do it much earlier than that, but at least aligned with the UAE government. So as a private sector, that's important. But then I was also sharing with you the role of the government. And I think probably we also can dwell on that. When we're sitting at the Circular Economy Council, so we have a Circular Economy Council, which is co-headed by the Minister of Economy, Abdullah Mantouk, and also Mariam Al-Mihri, the Minister of Climate Change, and Moyat, which is there, Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technologies, and other government bodies, but also other key private sectors, like us, like many other people are there, and academia. So we're working on 22 policies related to circular economy, and making sure that these policies are done correctly. So 5 policies were issued. Now, it would have been very easy for us to bring a policy from abroad, put it down, and say, okay, rolled out. I don't think that would be very successful. So what we did 2 things. Either we actually put a draft of the policy, circulated it to the subject matter expert in the private sector. So they told us what's good and fit for us in the country, and collaborated with them and issued the policy. Or we did it through a workshop, because we issued 5 policies, and they're all done through a workshop. And this is how the policies were rolled out. Now, the impact of the policy is going to be much higher for it to be executed because it came from the subject matter expert within the country, within the city itself. So that was a good thing to do. We're still working on the Balance 17. We're still going through the same route to make it happen.
Okay, very good. And Martin, your inspiration for creating Manufacture 2030 was to work with some of the largest corporations in the world on a software platform that tracks all their global operations, and then they can get a very clear line of sight, not only how to repair it and create the pathways to net zero.
Manufacture 2030 has been around since about 2018. So, and the first few years were very slow, as you can imagine. And then there was a very dramatic pickup. So we're now running 44 global supply chains for every single one of them would be a familiar name around the world in business. So from Ford to GlaxoSmithKline to a Tesco I mean, they're huge companies. And it's their global supply chains, manufacturing supply chains that we're working with. And so the platform itself enables them to engage. And coming back to the point you were making, the analogy you used with a digital transformation and with a sustainable transformation. This is a transformation program. It's not just a reporting program, and it's actually all about engagement, really, and how you engage your people or you engage your suppliers, in our case. But yeah, that's the genesis of the business. And we're in about 80 countries around the world. There are 10,000 suppliers on the platform, or just about, I think just under 10,000. We'll be hitting that number very soon. Yeah, we're helping them, those suppliers, to learn how to decarbonize, how to develop a strategy that'll take them down to net zero, and creating an engagement, a conversation between them and their customer.
Great. Let me follow up on that. It used to be, say, just as an example, Nike using child labor, for example, not being aware of it through a supplier, and they'd say, well, they supply to us, but we really don't have control of their governance. So can you cover that now when it comes to the entire supply chain and how it applies to climate? You can't just say, I get out of jail for free because it's just a supplier. Does Manufacture 2030 help them with that?
Yes. Well, I mean, when you look at most of these large corporations, between 60 and 90% of their footprint that they have to reduce will be in their supply chain.
True.
Most of it, dealing with your own, scope 1 and 2 is, relatively speaking, I use the word relative with respect,
complex,
because it is actually pretty hard, but relatively speaking, it's easy compared to dealing with your supply chain. And the clients that we're working with are signing up to science-based targets as the standard for the reporting that they're making back to the public markets that they're part of, or to their private investors perhaps. And those science-based targets require them to demonstrate a reduction in their scope 3. So a reduction in the emissions coming from their supply chain. And that's a big ask.
There are quite a number, 28 items when you talk about smart cities. So two main trends that globally going on is digital economy and circular economy. And digital economy will actually fuse the development of circular economy, quite a lot of it. At the group, first of all, before I go to the smart city, we're actually working on our AI model. I've been working with AI for about 40 years, so it's not something new. AI has been there, if you can predate it to 1648, by the way. But AI is actually loosely used as well, so we need to be careful. Everybody comes and says, like, we're using AI. When the peel the onion, it's not really AI, it's more of a digital or RPA model which is working on. So we're working on an AI model internally and also clubbing it with digital twins. So I'll explain. AI to make sure, or the certain waste management that we do, we have a vertical on circular economy where we take certain waste from food establishment, we treat it, we come up with a byproduct, and we put it back into the economy. So you have less carbon emission, less methane emission. When Her Excellency and both Abdullah Mantog and Mariam Mehri came to our plant, and we had actually the second Circular Economy Council meeting over there, we showcased how our dashboard will look like, which is mimicking the dashboard that Dubai is trying to create. I'll explain why. So dashboard will actually tell you live how much CO2 emission you're reducing, how much methane you're reducing, how many paper are actually not getting wasted because of that plant itself. And you'll be able to do that thing by actually using the digital economy of make sure that the data is getting fed to you. What we're also building along with that thing is your digital twins, which is building your factories in a digital virtual world, make sure everything is done over there, and then you bring it back into reality. So because we got plants within the UAE and we're expanding internationally, so it's going to be very important for you to have for us to have the digital twin. Going back to smart cities, Dubai actually building its own digital twin. And it's just amazing. So what they're doing their urban planning from city to make sure all the traffic is taken care of. How can you reduce your CO2 emission, methane emission with the planning and virtual world? How the green buildings will look like over there. traffic sector, signals, how would they look like there? Once you're done with it, you bring it back into reality and they say, okay, this is how we want to do the urban planning. So that means that your digital smart cities will incorporate quite a wide spectrum of digital and also also the circular economy in terms of the renewable energy using over there. How do you have smart grids? How do you have your digital twin? How do you use AI? How do you use your metaverse as well to make sure that you encompass? It's a huge web. A study on that has been done for the past 20, 30 years, by the way. And a lot of countries are working on their smart cities. One of the most successful ones are in China. I happened to meet the sixth guy who joined Microsoft, who actually was hired by the Chinese government to build their smart cities 20 years, 30 years ago. And this is how Chinese has advanced in their smart city. China is very bad at marketing, by the way. There are a lot of things they do, they don't tell us. But if you need to be there for you to get to know how advanced they are in so many things when it comes to technology. We're talking about 5G, they're already ahead of doing and developing 6Gs, by the way. So that's how cities will look like in the future, completely automated. Scary sometimes, but there's some benefit to it as well.
Well, you can test drive it in the digital world before you bring it to life.
Absolutely.
How does AI work, Martin, in this space?
Yeah, I was just going to build on what I was saying. I mean, I don't think it's possible to have the transformation that we require and the speed we would require without it being a digital transformation. It is absolutely essential that we digitize systems because of the scale of the transformation is so enormous. So if you can imagine a typical supply chain to anyone, a grocer or a pharmaceutical company or an automotive company, you're talking maybe 5 tiers. And each one of those, as you go down those tiers, the certainty and the visibility you have of what's going on splinters. There was a terrible disaster, wasn't there, in Bangladesh that we can remember a few years back.
In the textile.
That's right, yeah. And one of my clients, I remember we had a meeting that day with them, and they were, it was all over the news, and they were saying, well, look, it's terrible, but I'm really glad we don't have any suppliers there. Not true. They didn't know it. But somebody, one of their suppliers, had subcontracted to somebody else because they had too much demand, and it was, And so I won't say who the brand was, but their zips were turning up, in the rubble. And this, so the visibility as a starting place is absolutely critical and can only be delivered digitally. But then so can the engagement. You've got to engage with tens of thousands of companies, and within those companies, maybe 10 to 20 people to be able to deliver, to support them to be able to deliver their contribution to the reduction in emissions that you need for your net zero strategy.
Good.
And so it can only be done digitally.
Oh, that's fair. When we spoke this morning, you said there's always the danger of companies looking through their rear view mirror at historical data to say like where they want to go. And Maher's talking about the fact you're projecting into the digital footprint to show where you want to go in the future. How do you advise your clients to get on the pathway that looks forward then without the historical look back?
Well, and this isn't meant as a criticism of my competitors, but the vast majority of the software platforms out there helping with ESG are really just collecting historical data. And collecting historical data when you're and using that to help define a path to a future goal is a bit like driving down a windy road, only looking through your rear view mirror for direction. You're going to go in the hedge, aren't you, or off the road into the ditch. So what we get our suppliers using the platform to do is to build their net zero strategy, and we support them in lots of ways to do that, in the platform. So that then gives us and their customer what we call a glide path. So they can look out 3 and 5 years and they can say, okay, if we execute these 20 projects, we are likely to be reducing in line with the science at 4.2% per annum or whatever is required. And if we're not, then we can have a conversation with our customer about what might we be able to do to adjust.
Great. I'd love to get both of your thoughts on science-based evidence, because there's a lot of coverage out there. And it's very divisive, as you know, because Martin's spent a lot of time in the United States. This is not reality. You have a different leader, goes backwards. You have a new leader, goes forwards. How does the science-based target fit into Ulster Call? And is that your baseline, Maher? Or how do you kind of collectively rally around what is science and how do you implement on the pathway to net zero?
We had a very long discussion on this in other groups, in other panel discussions. I think it's important to learn, to understand the science-based, how is it done. But I'm a bit skeptical, and I also told this, I was very vocal about it to tell our Minister of, Maryam Al-Mahiri, the Climate Change Minister. I said, because I really don't know where they're based on. Have you validated them? Did your team validated this? She said, no. I said, then shouldn't we be doing that? Because what probably is different in the other part of the world may not apply over here. Yes, we can understand and learn from it. That's fantastically well. But how is this relevant to me or to my company or that company, depending on the size? So that's put us into seat back saying, oh, do we need to reinvent the wheel? I said, I'm not saying that. I'm only saying it that just try to find something which is meaningful to us, to this region. What is applicable somewhere else, someone who's taking a carbon CO2 emission happening in the airports, does not apply to the other sectors. And basically that's what's been happening. Most of the CO2, if we look at the academia and research, most of the CO2 emission have been actually being monitored in the airport. Why would you do that?
Yeah,
it's
not your baseline.
Is that your baseline? So I'm not saying it's skeptical. I'll take it very carefully.
Good, but how does the government approach it then? And that directive in terms of creating, you talked about an exco and then the next pathway to action. Are you a resistor? Are you suggesting that or not?
No, I'm not resisting it. I'm only saying that we need to validate some of these KPIs to see how they're applicable to us. And only then it makes sense for us to do so. I actually go back to what Martin has said. It's like, I need to see what is it good for me now. I see my data today. Yes, I may look at my past data just from learning perspective, but I need to see what is my baseline now and how do I improve on it. I look at the science-based of it, and I saw a lot of research on that thing, but I could not find the real formula. Of course, there are research on telling you the formula because we're working with academia, but you need to make sure that those are applicable to you over here. So if we go back to the ministry, I don't know, maybe they're thinking about it now, hopefully, and when the COP28 we'll find out because she's speaking in one panel before me and I'm panel after her, so I'll ask her. Or when I meet on the 4th meeting, I'm sure they will be doing something different, hopefully.
Okay, good. How does that apply to you, Martin? And do you have to convince CEOs and say, this is the pathway we're going on here, and we think this is advised on this scientific baseline?
So, well, I think it's a slightly different picture, which it is, it's driven by investors in my world, Western investors, who have decided to use science-based targets as a standard. And they are not perfect.
Right? Money talks.
Money talks.
Yeah.
And so it comes from, it's not a perfect standard, but it's the most rigorous that they currently have. And so they're applying it. And so they put a lot of pressure on the corporations who are our clients to adhere to and to develop science-based standards plans and to get certified for those science-based targets through the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Now, what that does around the world with their supply base is then cascade that as a standard. And I think it's different when you're a public or a private company here wanting to find your own standards. I totally agree. You want what's relevant to you locally. But this, of course, if you're a supplier in Guangdong and you're supplying into a company that has a science-based target out of New York or out of Europe, then it becomes very relevant to you.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's suddenly a standard which you can work with. Whether it's the best one for you locally, I don't know, maybe not. But it's the one your customer is, and standards are essential for this transformation to take place. If we don't have standards, what we get is a lot of very competing alternatives, and we get language which is confused. We get people thinking they're saying the same thing and they're not. They've got different reference points. So the establishment of standards of some sort or another are absolutely key. And there are some big initiatives around the world which are playing an important part.
Good. I want to spend a moment on informing the next generation. You made a good point about you collaborate with academia to get the best thought leaders and latest research and the latest presentations on the pathways to better policies. But how important is it to actually think a generation ahead? You used a figure of 1.8 generations of time to make change really happen.
Yeah, I think it's very important, very critical, to be honest with you, because the challenge that we're discussing about climate change, if we believe it's really, really critical, at our level we're discussing and we're educating ourselves, which is fantastically well. But what about the generation which is going to come and they don't even, not aware of it? I go and do keynote speaking at universities and schools. I find two groups of children. Some of them really passionate about working with climate, Some of them are complacent. They don't even know anything about it. So I said, okay, how do
Some
we...
think they can't make a difference, so they
Yeah.
kind of surrender too, which is a challenge. Right?
So one of the great things the Ministry of Education done a couple of months ago, just before the summer break. So they're going to train about 2,000 to 3,000 teachers, which was the Train the Trainer program as a pilot on the circular economy. And once it's that successful, they'll move it forward to make sure all the public schools will have curriculum on circular economy. I also happen to sit as chairman of board of schools that I am at. And one of the 5 things we're teaching them is about circular economy, sustainability, the environment-related matters, because we believe when you teach them, the dilemma is the following: the 1.8, how does it come? When you teach your children, when the children are taught, the disconnect is between them and the parents. They come back home, the parents still have the old habits of, I'm not sure if they're really worrying about the... Okay, let me ask this question, which I usually enjoy asking it. How many of you, with a show of hands, teaching your children about environment? 1, 2, 3.
It's a pretty good percentage.
No, it's 13%.
There are some late arrivals there.
Yeah, it's a 13%. Yeah? It's extremely low.
Some are feeling very guilty when they didn't have their hand on it.
So it's very, very low. And by the way, I was in a room. I asked this question. There were about 100 people. There were only 3% raised their hand. And they were very candid. That was very nice of them. But a lady called me up later on after the panel. She said, look, you need to ask how many people are teaching the family, not only the children, because some of us are not married. I said, okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that's possibility, right. Probably, yeah. So when they come back home, the parents are not aligned, so they probably gain 50% of the learning. When they come home, it gets depressed to 25% about, as per research. That's mean now the learning is only 25%. So then they're going to make a transformational change. When they become parents, their children learn 50%. They're happily to retain the 50% because now the children who retain 50% and they became parents, the retention is very higher. So you take about 1.8%, 1.8 generation to make that DNA change happen. Wow. But I always say, look, from faith perspective, we believe the environment is very important to take care of, period. His Highness Sheikh Zayed, and you've been here for a very long time, he was doing plantation during 60s and 70s and 80s, right? In the desert. And people asked him, why you're planting the desert? Hey, this is the environment, I need to take care of it. Why? It's coming from our faith. It's in our DNA, in many of us. Now, the reason why it is not widespread, probably because we're a very cosmopolitan international country. You've got about 200 nationalities over here. So everybody bring in their own culture. Of course, they gone settled, but the alignment is getting worked out in terms of the environment. So that's how we need to work on academia. So a lot of work is going on over there.
Good. Martin, if it wasn't the money pressure, and because you have pension funds and you have school endowments and feeding it, would your members really want to move as fast as you're suggesting?
No.
Yeah,
absolutely no. It varies a lot around the world. And as I mentioned earlier to you, we do a lot of work in the North American automotive market. And as you go into the Midwest, there's no doubt about it, we change our language and we talk less about climate and we talk more about carbon and cost. Because that resonates with an audience who are climate skeptics. If you're in Europe, there is very little skepticism about climate. There is an broad acceptance and I think a pretty deep level of education around it. And it's quite a contrast between the two. As I go to places like, if I go into China where we have a very big supply base, people don't question anything. It's simply if my customer says this, yes, of course I'll do it. So you have these very different levels of education around the world, I think, and different cultural responses to what your customer is asking you to do. So the most difficult market for us to engage in is Australia, where they tell you to, in no uncertain word, clear off.
No, I know that.
And they're pretty climate skeptical, so they're much more like America than Europe in that respect, and they're very forthright. And so we often have a difficulty with engagement in Australia. We have almost no difficulty in China and those Asian economies. Very strong engagement because they are very willing to please their customer. And we have to change the language in North America. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not one-size-fits-all.
Good. We have 4 minutes left. I wanted to get your views on accelerating these pathways to net zero and what we're hoping to get out of COP. We seem to be having a kind of a global discussion about the UAE as an oil and gas producer, which is kind of unfortunately diluting the message of trying to get everybody at the table to move at a faster pace. What do you hope comes out of this, Maher?
I think it's going to, I believe this is going to be the inflection point, hopefully. I know there have been a lot of skepticism on His Excellency Sultan Jaber, him being the CEO of one of the world leading oil producing company, ADNOC, but he's also the chairman of Masdar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if
That's
you look,
where he started, actually, as
absolutely.
a company. Yeah.
You know that. You've been here for a couple of decades. But let's give some stats on ADNOC, what they're trying to do, right? And very early on. It is the only oil and gas leading company globally today, the first, where the entire operation is ran on renewable energy. The entire operation ran on renewable energy, an oil and gas company. So it's not, they've got 7 patents, which a lot of people don't know about, and the way they do exploring, which is actually climate-friendly way. So if that is happening, and they've also announced their second carbon capture project in September. And their first carbon capture project was in 2016, just 1 year after the Paris Agreement, 2015. So the execution is not easy. So Sultan Jaber has been trying to do lots of changes. He's traveled the world. If you look at Masdar today, Masdar is investing, as we speak, in 40 active projects globally, the large projects. I thought I was very good in drawing the world map without looking at the world map. I actually learned there are a couple of islands over there which they're investing in. I never knew about them. I got to know them because of what they're doing. So they are not investing locally, but investing in global countries. One of the largest projects we just opened and revealed, it was in November this year itself, in Indonesia, the largest floating solar panel, which is going to be powering up 125 megawatts. So that tells you the skepticism really does not work. And when we hear this thing, and when he'd hear these things and tell you from experience, they're saying it's fine, but we continue marching and doing the work.
Right.
So
and they want the evidence, the baseline to show we've proven it.
Absolutely.
I hope we can get past that. That's the trick here. It's innovative, actually, to put oil and gas at the table because they are phenomenal at engineering, as you know, and getting projects done at scale. Do you feel the same, Martin?
Well, I think my hope for this COP coming up is that the guy leading it is a deal maker. And normally you look at the presidencies as the COPs and their politicians or their bureaucrats.
Yes,
generally
that's a fantastic point you're making.
And I think this is very different in that respect. And so long as the weighting of the deals being done are pro-climate as opposed to not pro-climate, then I think we could see some really interesting step forwards. The other thing I think is very interesting about Dubai doing this and His Excellency is that the opportunity to engage with the global south in the way that the Western countries have sort of failed to do. And so I think this is something else that is being brought to the table this time around. But deals, going with the money and doing deals is really what will drive the transformation. And my hope, in a sense, outside of COP, is inspired by what happened with mobile phones. In 1990, mobile phones were this big. Yeah. They cost thousands, tens of thousands of dollars.
The bricks.
They were bricks. Tiny numbers of them were big.
You had to carry the charger with you.
Right. They had, you could only use them in particular regions, and you had a less than 1% penetration of the population. Within 10 years, which is not dissimilar to the time frame we're talking about, what a transformation we had. Yes. We had these extraordinary computers. That was not driven by regulation and compliance. That was driven by deal-making and economic opportunity in the supply chain.
Yes.
We have to make this dramatic switch from thinking we are going to change the world by compliance. It'll only happen at the speed we need it to happen if we turn in carbon reduction into an opportunity for everybody up and down the supply chain.
Okay. What a fantastic conversation, actually. I was very fortunate to bump into both of you before we came out, kind of unplanned. But it made it for a richer conversation. I do appreciate the time. We can give our thanks to our two panelists. Maher, it's great to see you. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.